living in hope, abiding in hope, dwelling in hope is hard work, is it not? Hard work to live in hope, to live in a way that is both persistent and patient. Hope both holds on and then it lets go. Hope is now and it is not yet. Hope allows the future to be in relationship with the present. Hope is not without struggle. It is not without obstacle. It is more often a journey than a destination. And so, we continue our Advent journey today with the kindling of the second light of hope. We are here to kindle hope. And so, as we turn our gaze once again to the Advent wreath, I invite Nora Maurice to light our second candle of hope.
Please join me in the responsive reading printed in your order of service. How will Advent find us on this hopeful Sunday? We are. Let us take time to know it deeply and be assured that we are enough. May our gathering create a space for others who are not yet finding Advent's rhythm. Assured that we offer not easy answers, but a safe place to wonder, doubt, and grow. Faith, hope, and love are not raw materials meant to be manufactured into joy. Good morning. Welcome to Fountain Street Church. My name is Isabel Morrison, and I have been attending Fountain Street for all of my life. I'm a third-generation Fountain Streeter, and many of you probably know my parents, Bruce and Carolyn Morrison, and many of you would have known my grandparents as well, Paul and Sally Kempter. I grew up here at Fountain Street, and I'm involved in many activities. Among my first experiences here was singing in the junior choir. One Sunday, when my dad and I sat observing my older sister and the rest of the choir practicing under the direction of Mr. Wright McCarger, I learned that the next week they would be singing here in the big church. "I'm singing too," I proclaimed to my father. Although I was only 4 and couldn't yet read, I was allowed to sing as long as I learned the music by ear. I grew up in this community through character school and then Tower Club. I sang in the youth choir Ars Nova and continued to sing with a smaller group of singers called Shavesh after Ars Nova disappeared. In 10th grade, when the other members of that choir all graduated from high school, I joined the adult choir. I have also enjoyed playing in the bell choir, though I didn't have time for it this year. I'm very involved with Fountain Club, the high school youth group, and I help to plan and carry out weekly activities. I also organized the West Michigan Alternative Prom, which is a yearly event held in our sanctuary in May, our social hall in May, that offers the classic high school prom experience to LGBTQ youth and allies who wouldn't feel welcome at their own school's similar events. For the past 2 years, I have participated in the Ekphrastic Poetry and Art exhibit, which is in the summer, and it pairs visual artists with poets to create related pieces. This year, I'm collaborating with Jason and with Stephanie Kirkbride to put art exhibitions in the chapel that are related to the themes being discussed in worship. I am involved with a great assortment of activities here at the church. This community has offered me a second home in which to grow up, where everyone is accepted and respected, regardless of their beliefs. Here, I have been introduced to many of the things I now love, especially music. I am a senior in high school, so a good measure of how instrumental various things have been in my life is how often they pop up in my college essays. 4 of mine have featured Fountain Street Church. I would like to thank all of you who have helped me grow into the person that I am. You fill my life with faith, hope, love, and joy, and I hope that you too can find a home here. Welcome.
It is my habit to share a few readings every Advent that I find touching and useful. Last week I delivered one from memory. I'm afraid I can't say I have the same ability this week. I'm reading from Theodore Ledyard Cuyler, Remembering Christmas on a Farm in New York. And I think that this might hit a couple of notes that some of you will share. As the visits of Santa Claus in the night could only be through the chimney, we hung our stockings where they would be in full sight. 70 years ago, such modern contrivances as steam pipes and those unpoetical holes in the floor called hot air registers were as entirely unknown in our rural regions as gas burners or telephones. We had a genuine fireplace in our kitchen, big enough to contain an enormous back log and broad enough for 8 or 10 people to form a circle before it and enjoy the genial warmth. The last process before going to bed was to suspend our stockings in the chimney jambs, and then we dreamed of Santa Claus, or if we awoke in the night, we listened for the jingling of his sleigh bells. At the peep of day, we were aroused by the voice of my good grandfather, who planted himself in the stairway and shouted in a stentorian tone, "I wish you all a Merry Christmas." The contest was as to who should give the salutation first, and the old gentleman determined to get the start on us by sounding his greeting to the family before we were out of our rooms. Then came a race for the chimney corner. All the stockings came down quicker than they had gone up. What could not be contained in them was disposed upon the mantelpiece or elsewhere. I remember I once received an autographed letter from Santa Claus, full of good counsels, and our cook told me that she awoke in the night and, peeping into the kitchen, actually saw the veritable old visitor light a candle and sit down at the table and write it. I believed it all as implicitly as I believed the 10 Commandments or the story of David and Goliath. It's more than a little apt, if coincidental, that the composer of that piece, Jean Berger, the French name Berger means shepherd, as I recall. 'Tis the season of shepherds. I have two little scripture passages to share, one from the Common Lectionary for Christian Churches and one from the assigned passage in the Jewish lectionary, both of which are pertinent for this weekend. The first, the Christian one, are the very first verses in the gospel attributed to Mark. In the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, it says, as it is written in the prophet Isaiah, "See, I am sending my messenger ahead of you who will prepare your way. The voice of the one crying out in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord, make his paths straight." This refers not to Jesus, by the way, but to John the Baptist, and I'll come back to him in a bit. In Genesis, in scriptures read yesterday in the synagogue, there's this familiar passage. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the break of dawn. When he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he wrenched Jacob's hip at its socket, so that the socket of his hip was strained as he wrestled with him. He dislocated his hip, is what he means here. Then he said, "Let me go," this being the stranger, "for dawn is breaking." But Jacob answered, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." Said the other, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he replied. Then said the stranger, "Your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with beings divine." Israel meaning to strive with God, and have prevailed. I was in New York this week to attend the Metropolitan Opera, something I've done now for 20 years. When I arrived in Brooklyn in 1994, the search chair invited me to attend with him, which I jumped at eagerly, for I had listened to it every Saturday on the Texaco Metropolitan Opera broadcast for I don't know how long. He wanted me to go because his wife didn't want to go with him, and so we created two opera widows, he and I. He and I went a half a dozen times a year, my entire tenure there, and when I came here, I would go back once or twice annually, not only for the opera, but for the friendship of all those years. He died this past spring, my friend, and the last time we attended was exactly a year ago, and so I felt a powerful need to go one more time in honor of him and of our many evenings together. Endings are hard. We all know that. We all know, and I've seen marriages that hung on too long, and parents and children that wouldn't cut the last umbilical, and people who should have changed jobs long before they left or were told to go. Because admitting something is over is hard, even when it's hard to stay. Good things like friendships and loves and careers, they're even harder to admit are over. Edna St. Vincent Millay, in a wonderful poem called Dirge Without Music, writes these lines: "I am not resigned to shutting away of loving hearts into the cold ground. So it is, and so it will be, for so it has been time out of mind. Into the darkness they go, the wise and the lovely, crowned with lilies and with laurel they go, but I am not resigned." We know the feeling. We know the facts. We know that things change and things end, but we cling, we hold on. We do not resign our hearts even when the flesh has moved on. But of course, we're always saying goodbye in life, and we always resist. And this is Advent, so why am I being so grim and grief-stricken? Well, if faith needs doubt to be honest, which is what I said last week, hope needs despair to be real. Life is not just cheerful things that we get to hang on to, but also hard things. It's not just sunshine, it is shadow. It is the whole of life that asks us to believe in it with our faith and to long for it with our hope. All of it, sunshine and shadow both. And hope is the second theme of Advent here at Fountain Street Church. And I think we need an honest hope that does not deny the reality of loss and despair, but in fact tries to give meaning to loss and despair. And that's what I hope I can do something about in the next few minutes. I'm also doing a long survey, a spiritual history of this church, which is in some ways the history of liberal religion itself, and perhaps your own story. We have, over the last 3.5 months, seen success and failure, fire and fortune. And now I come to the year 2000, actually the end of the year 1999. 20 years after Duncan Littlefair retired, 18 years after David Rankin had arrived, and 2 years after he had left, and the church chose Brent Smith, who, like David and Duncan, initially refused the offer, but like David and Duncan, eventually succumbed. You can't walk in here and ask yourself, why not me in that pulpit? You should know that Brent and I knew each other for years before he came here and before I came here. We went to the same seminary, had many of the same teachers. We were almost near colleagues when he was serving in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and I was in Austin. Brent has a personality reminiscent of Duncan, ebullient and confident and sparkly. He had experience like David Rankin and was about the same age when he arrived. All the numbers added up. Everyone had reason to hope that a century of growth and success would continue one upon the other. And it didn't. Though all the right ingredients were present and all the right choices were made, things did not work. I cannot explain why, because I was not here, but even if you were here, you can't explain it completely either. Brent's ministry ended after less than 2 years, and the church was left with some very tough questions to ponder. Consultants came and helped us all, those who were here, to face those tough questions. This was the first time in the history of this church that the institution itself did genuine soul searching. Now, you could say this was long overdue. If you go for a century without thinking of what you're up to, you should probably stop and take a pause anyway. That's also true beyond the church in the larger world of liberalism in general, which had been in decline actually since 1980, but up until then, liberalism had been an ascendant notion. Starting around 1900, it was ascendant in religion, in politics, in social thought. It took a while to get up ahead of steam, but by the 1970s, it was a dominant way of thinking. But any time any ideology becomes so established that it thinks itself inevitable, that is the moment it begins to decline. Conservatism has been ascendant in all its forms for the last 30 years, and at some point it too will become overconfident and it will decline. Though when will not be obvious to anyone until after the fact. As I've pointed out, the pendulum of left and right, conservative and liberal, go back and forth across the centuries. And when I say conservatism, I mean that religion and political and social conservatism is on the rise. I personally believe that the action by the Michigan State House to pass the Michigan Religious Freedom Restoration Act is a license to discriminate against others in the name of religion, and it fairly drips with the smug certainty that once liberals bragged about. And I do in my heart wonder when Whitman's hope for a people who, quote, rise at once against the never-ending audacity of elected persons will, in fact, take place. Maybe the protests this past week against police violence will embolden us to protest political chokeholds as well. It seems I've wandered a long way from hope and Advent, doesn't it? But not. There is no surer sign of hope than when people resist power. Resignation is an act of hopelessness. The people who marched in New York and Chicago and St. Louis and elsewhere are acting out of hope. Millet refused to be resigned to death even when her friends were placed in the ground. And in 2001, this church resisted resignation as well. There was hope somewhere. You might say that here it was different visions of hope that collided 14 years ago. The new minister had one vision, the church had another, and they didn't know they were different until they locked horns with each other. That needs to be lifted up. That conflict is always about different visions of hope. We forget that. We think of the conflict as being bad, but what really made it happen, and makes all conflict happen, is that we have different ideas of where to go, different visions. And when this church found itself resisting a new vision of hope, a different one, we sort of came off what I would call spiritual cruise control, just going through the years as if they were all the same, and had to start driving our own car. It was time to decide what we were about. Decide, not just keep doing it the way we always had. Committees were formed, task forces met, not to fix blame on this or that, or to find out what went wrong. That would be natural. That's the ordinary tendency. But no, what this church did in the wake of a moment that it did not anticipate was to take responsibility, put its hand back on the wheel, put its foot back on the accelerator. What an act of wisdom that was 14 years ago. Those who were here did that. They overcame the fear and chose hope. They overcome the anger and chose faith. And I think that act in the year 2001 and 2002 literally saved this church. Truly they did. Without a vision, the people perish, it says in Proverbs, a book in the Bible. 3,000 years later, Harvey Milk said, always give them hope. Never thought the two of them would line up side by side, did you? But that's what hope is about. It transcends Bibles and scriptures and books. A week ago was World AIDS Day. There was a fairly substantial crowd here, not as big as we are today, but I can pretty much guarantee that a whole lot more of them in here had HIV than do right now. We've done it for 3 years here, and I'm very proud of that. If there is a community that is completely sustained by hope, it is those who deal with HIV and AIDS. I hugged a friend, a good friend, who has had HIV for 25 years. 25 years ago, he didn't have reason to hope he would live for 25 months, but he did. If there is a people who live on hope, it is people of color in America, so much so that they are as overrepresented in our armed services as they are in our prisons. And if there is a church that can hear the hope of HIV community, who can understand the hope of people of color, who can grasp the struggle of people of dubious faith and of dubious standing, it is this church. And that is my hope, that we, often privileged in our personal lives, often enjoying elevated status out in the world, have in our hearts the capacity to resonate with the hope of those who are ill, those who are in prison, those who are of color, those who are disabled, those who are lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transgender. That we of all people can hear the song of hope that others may not. That is my hope. The gospel reading this morning is about John the Baptist, as I mentioned, who is out there in the wilderness in his hair shirt, predicting the appearance of the Messiah. He comes at a time when Judea is discouraged and downtrodden, on the point of despair. And John is telling them not only not to lose hope, but to get ready, to work on it. He says, to make the hope come true, we have to prepare the way. Hope is not standing there waiting for the Messiah to show up. It's making it happen. I'll bet you some of you are going to throw a party in the next week or two. I'll bet you some of you know that it might snow. I'll bet all of you will shovel the walk before they come, won't you? You have to prepare the way for your guests to arrive. If you don't shovel the walk, you either don't expect them to show up or you expect them to come to you with shoveling their own way up your walk. That would be inhospitable, wouldn't it? Real hope is preparing the way for what you expect will come. Preparing the way. The very soul of Advent, the whole season, is to prepare the way. Whatever we have faith in must also have a hope in it for the future and a commitment to help that hope come true. These are logically inseparable in my mind. If you have faith, you have hope, and if you have hope, you are trying to make it come true. If your faith does not inspire action, it's an insipid faith, and it's not worth having in the first place. So I ask, what are we preparing for? I ask that of you as an individual, but also as an institution. To each of you, I ask, how does your life prepare for your deepest hope? Do you even know what your deepest hope is? That is the spiritual task, after all. I ask what your deepest hope is, not what your deepest desire is. They are different. Have you ever separated hope from desire? That's a spiritual challenge for us all. How are you living in any way that prepares for the arrival of your deepest hope? There's a prayer you can take home, one that you will not be able to answer comfortably. Are you, in fact, I would put it, preparing for a future hope, or are you defending yourself from a future fear? Another valuable question. Or to use the biblical story, are you struggling in the dark against something or for something? Are you defending yourself against an attack from an unknown stranger, or are you wrestling a blessing from an angel? What are you doing with your life? Because if you're defending yourself against fear, you are not living with hope. If you are wrestling for an angel for a blessing, you are. And that's a question only you can answer for yourself. Now, I have to turn and ask all of us who are members of this church, are we doing one or the other? Are we preparing the way for our deepest hope? Are we wrestling our fear down, or are we wrestling an angel into our arms? When I speak of freeing the mind, I mean clearing away the fears and sometimes even the false hopes that distract us from what is truly worth hoping for. When I speak of growing the soul, I mean finding the strength to say, "This I hope, it is mine, I will live for it." When I speak of changing the world, I mean living that hope out loud, not just in the privacy of your soul when you feel bad. I'm saying that we, this church, this community, this nation, have to trudge out into the dark sometimes, shovel the snow of resignation, for if we do not get out there with a shovel, hope will take a lot longer to get here. In 2019, just 4 years away now, we're going to be 150 years old. And I love anniversaries. You get to look back, and we can set up historical displays, and we should do that because we are always teaching our history not only to ourselves but to the people who join us, because whenever you join us, it becomes your history too. So we should do something about it. It's good to celebrate those things. It's important that we do it, but it is far more important that we learn from it to free our mind, to see our deepest hope, to grow our soul, to claim it and hold it, and to get out in the cold and snowy world, a world frozen with fear and iced with despair, and prepare the way. May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight, thou who art my strength and my salvation. Amen.